All right, welcome. It's great to have Father Mike Schmitz today on the show. We just got done, Father Mike filmed a course for the Revive platform on preaching. It was super powerful, really beautiful to kind of hear some of his thoughts from such an amazing preacher on that topic of preaching. And Father Mike, it's really great to have you on.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. And it was so much, I really enjoyed filming that. I'd been actually thinking about, I wish I could offer something with regard to preaching somewhere, like to help priests and deacons. And so thanks for the opportunity. It was beautiful. I mean, it was so thoughtfully done. And I think that's kind of the beauty. Like, I know people talk about sometimes with podcasts, it's this great forum where you can have this longer conversation. Right. And there's something similar with like a course where you can really like get into and say everything you want to say. Really, and yours was definitely a masterclass. So I recommend people go check that out. But obviously, Father Mike, you've done a lot of amazing work for the church. I think it's kind of very cool that at the same time that you're still involved and engaged in full-time ministry, both as a campus minister or a chaplain at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and then in the diocesan youth and young adult ministry office as well in Duluth. And I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts just in general in this kind of moment of renewal that's like required and so many are desiring in the church. Like, what's some of the stuff that really gives you hope as you look around at some of the ministry you're doing and some of the things that are happening? Yeah, and that's a great question. One of the things you even mentioned, just being part of full-time ministry, that like when it comes to like speaking or presenting, that's not the primary assignment that the bishop has given me, my bishop has given me. And so one of the things that I find hopeful and encouraging is being on the ground and like working with our middle schoolers or with our high schoolers, with our college students, because that's when you see like real lives being changed. And so one of the things I've found is that in our current culture, it's almost impossible at a certain point for someone to just to be Catholic by going with the flow. Like at some point they have to make a decision for Christ and for his church, or they are taken away. And they can be washed away. They can be washed away. But those who stay are staying because they're choosing to do that.
Yeah.
So I see those. I see that all the time, and that's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope. Is recognition of like, no, you can look at statistics and you look at numbers, which are really disheartening. But then when you see people who are really choosing Jesus and they have to fight for it too. And that's something that is remarkable. The number of students I'll have at University of Minnesota Duluth who, like, in order for them to either become Catholic or to remain Catholic, they have to make pretty incredible decisions, pretty dramatic decisions about their lives in order to do that. And I see that all the time. It happens all the time. That's one big thing.
Yeah, and that's why I hear that in your preaching. It's kind of this sense of you can almost see the people that you're thinking of when you're telling different stories, or what do people need to hear? What do these hearts need and require? And I think you're right. Maybe there was a generation or a time where. Right. Like the culture itself was supportive enough of just religious practice or Catholicism, even if you think of some of like the the Catholic culture that certain cities used to have or something like that. And you're right, in this day and age, I'm a millennial. You work with a lot of Gen Z people too right now. That's kind of it, right? Is there this fundamental moment of decision? If that doesn't happen, the option is probably more likely, at some point drifting away.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting too. Whenever we get to the readings, like this upcoming Sunday, we have the reading of I've come to cast a fire on the earth and not come for peace, but for division. And Jesus is saying, I'll be the dividing line between father and son, between mother and daughter, between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. And I just keep coming back to this, that I wonder if there was a season in the life of the church and the life of Christianity where that gospel would have been like, yeah, maybe for Jesus's day, like maybe back in the day when it was a call for some Jews to come to recognize Christ as the Messiah or not, but not really for us anymore. And yet I think right now, so many of the young people I talk to, they're like, yep, that's exactly what it is. In my giving my life fully to the Lord, that's caused a division between me and my brother, between me and my sister, between family members being, it's divided 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. Happens a lot, maybe more often than it had in the past, because I think it was kind of generally accepted that, well, no, we all kind of sort of believe the same things. And now it's, well, gosh, the worldviews are so diametrically opposed, and yeah, you have to choose.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you mentioned the statistics, in that regard, like making this choice or not, it's clear from looking at those, unfortunately, that like right now we're not doing as good of a job as we could be as a church. And that is some of it. Just, it's hard to be countercultural and, it's not a numbers game, right? That's not necessarily it. But, certainly you're seeing, probably, I know people that are a fruit of your campus ministry, up at UMD and some of the stuff that is working there. So I'd be interested to hear you kind of say, like, what could the church be doing more of? I don't want to put in the negative, like, why are we failing? But it's almost like, what could we be doing more of if we want to see those statistics, kind of change, where it's, if young people are leaving in droves right now, where the opposite is actually true, like what's some of the secret sauce, or what works?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because there's a book by two brothers named Chip and Dan Heath, and they have a book, they have a number of books, but in one of them they talk about this man who is tasked with eliminating malnutrition in the jungles of Vietnam, essentially. And he was given like abundant resources and given this commission to do this job that was monumental, because malnutrition was rampant in the hill country in Vietnam and all over the place. And so as he's looking at it, he was saying, what can I do? Do we fly in nutrient dense foods? Do we raise a lot of money to be able to have all these teaching programs, kind of a thing? And rather than kind of just start throwing whatever he thought could work, what he did was he went to these villages, and he found that not every child was malnourished. He found that in every village there were a number of children who were fully nourished, and they weren't living in different villages. They didn't have parents who were more educated. They just had moms who were feeding their children in a slightly different way with the resources that they had at their disposal. And so we found that, wow, these kids who are not malnourished, but who are fully nourished, their moms prepare their meals in this slightly different way that any mom could do. It's accessible. And so they called it the bright spots. They looked for the bright spots of what's working. And so they trained these moms to be able to train the other moms. Here's how you do it. So they didn't have to come in with this, massively funded, food drop or food drive. They just locally said, this is what's working, multiply this. And so there are 3 bright spots that I think Pew Research Center did some things about when it comes to young Catholics who become mature, practicing adult Catholics. And they had 3 bright spots when it came to their youth. They found that out of the 10% of 10% of high school graduates who were raised Catholic remain Catholic. So a really low number. But that's kind of like you'd say, only 10% of the kids in this village are nourished. Yeah. And so what are they doing that we can get the other 90%? So these bright spots, 3 of them. One is they participated in an event other than Sunday Mass on a weekly basis, or at a regular basis at least, whether that was youth group, or that could be a Bible study of some sort. It could be a small group. It could be religious ed. It could even just be like the normal religious ed of the parish. But it was something on a regular basis other than Sunday Mass. It would include Sunday Mass, kind of that's the assumption. The second thing was that they had an adult other than their parent who invested deeply in them. So there was some kind of mentorship, some kind of discipleship, someone, again, other than mom or dad who really cares. And the third thing is they had an encounter with God as God. So whether that be like through adoration, they had to encounter that God is real, or confession, where he knows me and loves me. That they encountered God as transcendent but yet immanent. And so those 3 things are the bright spots, right? So regular attendance of something, having an adult who invested deeply in their lives, and an encounter with God as God. And so one of the things we did for our youth ministry is like, okay, so when it comes to our programs, I work at the diocesan level, but I can encourage our local people to say, how can you put on events or programs that you come into regular contact with your youth, like on a regular basis? So that first bright spot. Second piece is when it comes to getting volunteers for your youth program, what you don't need is just someone who can stand up in front of the room. You need someone who has not only a willingness, but also space in their life to invest in a young person. And that's so critical, because there's a lot of people who would say like, no, I'd love to teach on Wednesday night, or I'd love to teach with this thing. I'd love to help out in this area. But what we need to be looking for is not just someone who's willing to show up once on a Wednesday night or once to teach, but someone who has room in their life for another human being. And not just for that teen, but probably for their family as well, probably for their parents, maybe for their siblings, because that's like normal relationship as opposed to kind of like this weird, awkward, like here's the adult investing deeply in a teen who's their parents doesn't know. So they have room in their life. And third thing is when it comes to our diocesan events, when it comes to any of our events, is how do we make space again in our programs or in whatever we're doing so that we can remove our teens from just the hustle and bustle, the overly packed busyness, and put them in front of the Lord in the Eucharist, or bring them to a place where they just encounter him. We just got done with a junior high retreat, and it was incredible. 250 or so middle schoolers and high schoolers who that's what we emphasized. We had adults in their lives who led their small groups. Like we didn't just, not some stranger adult, someone to lead your small group. We had a number of opportunities for them to be able to encounter the Lord through confession, through mass, through adoration, through prayer, through reading scripture. And some of our adults were like, well, yeah, I mean, that's nice. But you can do adoration anywhere. Or yeah, it was nice, but you can go to confession anywhere. And it's true, you can. It's the same Jesus. But there's something about making space for that. Something about like saying, okay, no, you're not, this didn't just happen in the midst of a lot of other things that happened. This is like you took time away. So the value of retreat, right, is not just who you encounter, but the fact that there is space in a person's life for that Jesus himself, to actually not just meet us, but change our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things when it comes to how I'm looking at ministry is we have such an over-scheduled life that even if I encounter Jesus on a Tuesday afternoon, but Tuesday night, I've already got to go back to my normal life. And so I can't even, he has no space. It's like the parable Jesus tells about the seed that gets thrown on shallow soil and it grows, but then it just gets choked because there's so many other things going on.
Right.
We want to create space that way.
Yeah, and it's simple principles too, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like we do that in ministry sometimes, where it's like we got to find this silver bullet, and it's going to be this crazy strategy and totally different. And what worked 5 years ago, maybe that doesn't work now.
Yeah,
and it's almost like the best restaurants are always like simple ingredients, just like prepared well, fresh. Yeah. Like these are timeless principles. Adults mentoring other people, encounters with Jesus. Like the recipe hasn't changed. It's just, are we willing to commit? Like that's very data based, simple stuff that you're applying that is like, it's not complicated.
Right.
We kind of do that a little bit, right? In ministry, overcomplicate it.
Totally, because it's like, what's the newest thing?
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, even think about, so Gen Z or millennials, anybody. I mean, even adults who are starved for connection. Like just absolutely, I mean, the epidemic of loneliness that it kind of pervades our culture right now, that doesn't just set in middle age or in late old age. It's our middle schoolers who feel completely unknown, uncared for, unseen, unloved. High schoolers feel the same way. Our college students, that's one of the things we keep coming back to, is we want every person who comes to our ministry to be seen, to be known, to be cared for, and to be loved. And that's like, okay, so how do we do that?
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's not rocket science.
It's earth-shattering to an individual life, but it's not like this isn't some brand
it's not new.
Yeah.
So relational ministry could be the term that gets coined, right? So, but at the same time, that the reality of it, it's not new.
Yeah.
Like discipleship is, friendship. I get it. Friendship that's oriented towards following Jesus better.
Right.
Discipleship. Oh, gotcha. So friendship.
Cool. Yeah. Right. Yeah. We, in your course, in a lot of ways, we had you, really the audience that you were speaking to was, it's a homiletics course.
Right.
As much as it's a preaching course, it's specifically focused on like the homily, and you're speaking really to your brother priests. And I think just even some of the things you mentioned, like the priesthood is pretty countercultural right now.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful sign, but it's a sign of contradiction in so many ways to the culture. And I just would be interested to hear you say, like, you seem to be doing pretty well. Like, you seem like a happy, guy, like, that really, seems to genuinely love your priesthood and your life. And I'd be interested to hear, like, what are some of the things you've found that really lead to like a fruitful, joyful, impactful fruitful in your own life, but then also out there priesthood.
That's a good question, because I guess And part I don't spend a lot of time like
thinking about
that.
Sure.
I was like, oh, no, this is how it is. And I mean, I do a lot of reflection, like, in prayer and whatnot. I do a lot of prayer, Tim, just so you know.
Very holy. Just
make sure we all on the same page.
Say it into the microphone. Yeah.
Pray a lot every day. But I think of this in relation to some of our men in discernment. I was talking to our vocation director, and there's some guys who, they discerned out of the seminary, and I was like, good. It means discernment's working. And he said, well, for some of them it is. And for others, the issue is they are too, when it comes to discernment, they're not willing to just kind of lean in fully to formation, to seminary life. And so what they find themselves doing is kind of assessing their level of happiness or their level of satisfaction on a moment-to-moment or day-to-day basis, instead of saying, no, this is the life. I'm living the life of a seminarian because I discerned that I'm going to enter into this life. Now I'm just living it, as opposed to like constantly saying, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? Like I'm constantly checking my pulse, and that sense of like, oh, if you just like, I discerned this is where God's called me, and I'm just going to lean into it. And yes, I'll pay attention to like the functioning of the dials and make sure everything's going well, the oil levels are full. But if I'm constantly obsessed or preoccupied with how am I doing, then it takes me out of the moment. And whatever kind of joy I have, it minimizes. Whatever kind of pain I have, it magnifies. And so one of the things I would say for myself is like, I'm really happy about this, that God has called me to be a priest, and I'll just do what he asked me to do. And just kind of, I guess, leaning into the moment and saying, I don't have to ask the question, am I supposed to be still, but should I still be a priest? Like, no, of course, well, that question is not a question.
Yeah.
That needs answering or needs even.
Did you take vows years ago? Then yeah, you are.
Yeah, it's same kind of thing like if someone's married. Like,
right, yeah.
Do I stay here or not? Like, well, I mean, you promised to, so yes, you do. And so I think there's something about that just like a freedom that can say, even when things are difficult, there's joy because I'm exactly where God wants me to be. The big tragedies or the big sadnesses in my life have always been of my own making. Sure. It's just like, if I'm ever sad as a priest, it's all because I did something I shouldn't have done. Like, cause I messed up, I screwed up, I said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing. And like, man, this stinks. Well, yeah, because you shouldn't have said that or done that or, and so.
You can trace the fault back.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I create my own misery.
I do think you bring up an interesting point about discernment, right? 'Cause we're all discerning, like so many people are discerning something, right? There's people listening to this who are working in parishes and are, discerning if they're supposed to stay there. There's people who are, and I do think there's sometimes like we talk a lot about following peace and letting peace lead and looking for joy and like that can be a sign of, but there's a balance there too, right? Where like certainly, one of the ways God can move is in that disquiet and stuff. But like with discernment, I think I've talked to a lot of people where sometimes, they're on the path. And they assume that when because it got hard or because they started, not feeling it as much, something that is like an automatic, like you're doing God's will, and if it starts to feel bad, it's because you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
It's
he must be calling me somewhere else.
Right. You know what I mean?
This must not be where I'm supposed to be.
Do you ever talk to people who kind of like that, that's kind of the mindset around it? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just that kind of thing of like being able to say, okay, can we let's narrow down what's really happening? And that's the kind of thing, that process of discernment or process of even spiritual direction for somebody in that kind of context is being able to ask the question and let them reflect honestly on, so what is the reason? So here's I think if this is an example. I was meeting with a gal who was engaged, and at one point she emailed me and said, you can take the wedding off your calendar.
Oh, wow. We're
not getting married anymore. I'm like, oh, well, I write back, would you want to talk about that? And she's like, yes, so she came in, and I had not yet, someone handed me their wedding, like with 4 weeks to go. They had done all the prep, so I had I met her, but never met the couple. Turned out that they've been dating for 5 years, and she really loved him. She thought he was a great guy. He loved her, but he had a drinking problem. And she kept saying, please get help about this, And he just, yeah, fine. She said the number of times she had to like drag him from his truck to his house. He's blackout, kind of drunk, was just so awful. And they had a weekend away with some friends, kind of like almost like a bachelor party type situation. And she's like, just don't drink this weekend. And he said, okay, I won't. And then he did. And so she's like, we have to put off the wedding because we're getting married in 3-4 weeks. and you haven't dealt with this. And so he says, if you're putting it off, then I'm canceling it. And so as she's telling me this whole thing and just processing her emotions, she's like, but he's a great guy. He's not a monster. I don't mean to paint the picture of him as being a terrible human being. I'm like, well, of course he's not a monster. And of course he's not a terrible human being. You wouldn't have dated him for 5 years if he was. But you can't ignore the fact that this is the reason why you're not getting married. Like, it's not because he's a jerk. It's not because he's a terrible human being. It's not because he's a monster. It's because he's an alcoholic and he's not getting any help about this. And you need to know that this is the reason why, because what's going to happen is in 6 months, you're going to see him and he's going to be the awesome guy that he is. And you're going to be like, wait, I can't believe, why did I miss my chance? This is the reason. It's not because he's not great. It's because he's not prepared to be able to enter into marriage because of his alcoholism. Something similar is the case whenever we're discerning anything, is that I'm going this way, but I have to know, why am I going this way? Because the day is going to come where I'm like, wait, why did I do that? Oh, life could be so much better somewhere else. Like, yes, but I remember this is the reason. So for my own discernment, I was dating this gal who, like, I was getting ready to get married to her. The plan was I was a missionary in Central America. When I got back, that's when I would officially propose. We had talked about it already.
Sure.
And then the following summer, we'd get married. And in the midst of that, God kind of stepped in and made it really clear that he was calling me to seminary.
Wow.
And so even though after that, there were a number of times I'm like, Melissa, I still just am in love with her. Or even like other people I'd meet and go like, I could fall in love with you pretty easily. But that was never the question of like, but does that mean? I mean, I did ask the question, here's the cute girl behind the library counter at the seminary. She's awesome. And we just really click. Maybe God, you brought me here to meet her. And
this is your will, right?
Right, exactly. That's why. It makes so much sense now. And like, okay, but that wasn't the reason why I showed up in the first place. It was, you clearly called me to this. And until that changes, these other details are important. I'm going to pay attention to them. But they don't mean that original reason is now void, because they don't address the original reason.
Yeah.
The original reason was, I'm absolutely convicted and convinced that Jesus, you are extending an invitation to me to be here, not because I just fell out of love with Melissa and now might as well try this. Does that make sense?
It makes, yeah.
That would be convoluted, but
No, I think it kind of reminds me a little bit of something you said in the course. And I think people should know too. I'm going to say this one right into the microphone. Like, having spent the last day with you doing this course and stuff, one of the humblest, just like most genuine, authentic. I know like a lot of people know of you and stuff, and it's powerful to meet you and really encounter your humility. And something you said in the course that was like really kind of along those lines was this temptation to store up treasures on earth, versus treasures in heaven. It kind of like, as you're telling that story, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that. But even as you continue into priesthood, there's probably that, like in all of us in our vocations, or I'm thinking of myself too. It's like you have this initial moment of conversion, this initial moment of vocational choice, but then there's this constant decision to keep reminded of like treasures in heaven. And I see that in you in a lot of ways. Like, you're not trying to store up treasures here on earth. Like you're aiming for heaven, and it's really powerful to witness that. I would just be interested to hear, like, for how could people who are in ministry or kind of trying to follow the Lord, like that continued growth from point A to like sanctity.
Yeah.
Like, what has that looked like for you? How'd you do that?
No, well, thank you.
How'd you get so humble, Father?
Well, let me tell you my story. I was like, do you know that I rented the cheaper Wrangler?
Oh, never mind. Yeah. I hadn't seen that yet.
They were like, here's a basic package. We can upgrade the Wrangler. I was like, how much is that? They said this much, but I'll knock 80% off for you. I'm like, okay,
let's do it.
I never get to do that. So now.
Well, you're in Colorado.
I'm in Colorado for crying out loud.
No.
I'm going to go mountaineering after this. What do they call it? Rock crawling or something? Jeeping?
Yeah.
No. So good question. What was the question again? How did I get so awesome?
Yeah.
No, just, I would imagine that it gets a little bit easy, I think, when someone's in a relationship with, so for example, for anyone who's married, you'd be able to say, okay, I want to do X. What does my wife have to say about that? Because I'm not just going to do X. So I'm in this relationship where I owe something to her. And part of that owing is I owe her my love, I love her my honor, I love her my obedience. And so in that, it makes everything so much simpler. It makes, not that easy, but it makes everything very, very clear as far as like, okay, I got this crazy idea to do this. Well, let me just wait a moment, because I need to I need to see if this corresponds with what my bride wants. And for me, the easy thing is I have my bishop, and he says, and someone asked me earlier today, like, do you just have a passion for, campus ministry? Like, well, I mean, I really love being on campus. But when the bishop tells me, Father Schmitz, you're leaving campus, then I will have a passion for campus that takes a back seat to a passion for parish ministry. That has to. And I don't have to ask the question, but are you sure, Bishop? Because think about this. I just get to say, yeah. I mean, there's something that's so freeing about obedience. In fact, St. Maximilian Kolbe in the Office of Readings, he says the exact same thing. He said, Joe, just obey your superior in everything, unless he's calling you to sin. Don't do that.
Sure.
But he says there's a freedom there because you know that every time you say yes, you are saying yes to the Lord. And so that, once I start thinking that I know better than the bishop, or I start thinking that I need to become the captain of my own life, that would be a bad day. I guess even like thinking about like the opportunity to be here and to do the revive work, or Lighthouse, when you used to work for Lighthouse. Some people will ask, how did you get into this whole thing? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I want to create a YouTube channel, or I want to have a podcast. I'm like, okay, well, how did that go down for me? How it started was, we had some students who said, you should record your homilies. And I was like, I don't think so. That seems a little bit too kind of arrogant. And they're like, no, Father, it's okay. You just press record and press stop, and we'll post them. Okay. And then there was a guy at Lighthouse who his son had his iPod on,
That's how,
and he's like, what are you listening to? He's like thinking music, and he's like, oh, this priest. Like, really? What? Why would you do this, teenage son of mine? And then he took, I think it was your idea. Maybe it might have been your idea.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're telling it well, yeah.
No, I don't know. And they said, well, let's take 3 or 4 of these homilies that were a series that I had done on the Eucharist and make a CD out of it. And then from there, it was, someone said, oh, I listened to that CD. Would you give a talk at Steubenville? I'm like, okay, sure. And someone from there said, hey, would you give a talk at Focus, for Focus at Seek? Okay. And then it kind of just went from there. Then Ascension saying, hey, would you contribute to this program? Now, would you want to have a YouTube channel? Like, I don't know. What do you think? It'd be helpful for people? And the whole time saying, hey, Bishop, is it all right? And he's like, Brother Schmitz, as long as you're stable, you're emotionally okay, and spiritually, as long as you're still praying, then go ahead. And when that stops, then you need to stop. And
well, I remember I reached out to you about an event a couple years ago, and I remember you saying it was on a weekend, like on a Sunday or something, and you were like this is I'm here. I can't come to like that event. I have a parish. I have students that need me, and like there's a great like you said that's vocations. They constrain your freedom so that you can actually be free to like live.
That's a great way to say it. It constrains your freedom so you can actually have the freedom to live,
to like do because infinite choices. You just get kind of. It's funny that was a fun. I remember that CD. It was his like 17-year-old son. He was like a senior in high school, and he was like he didn't like anything with the faith, but he's been like listening to these homilies, and I was like, well, this has to be something we should look at.
That is awesome.
That's so small cool. World. That's fun. True worship. Yeah, that was a great good memories, good times.
No, or even just like you said, the people will say, oh, gosh, now it sounds again it's kind of whatever, but like, hey, do you ever get used to like people wanting your attention or whatever? And the reality is, if I'm at a conference and there's a number of like teens or college age students, whoever who want to line up like for a photo or something like this, that's not where I live. Like, that's not home. Home is where the people I'm working with, they only want a spiritual father. Like, that's all they care about is he here? Does he see me? Does he know me? Does he love me? Does he care for me? Like, that's all they care about. And so I remember there was a couple of years ago, there was a young man who transferred to UMD from somewhere else, and we had one of our kind of bigger events. We have a like mass and then a meal afterwards on Thursday nights. Students all over the place, and he said, "Oh yeah, so I see like a lot of your fans here," and one of our young men. He's a senior at that point. He was completely baffled. He's like, "What?" He said, "We're not fans, we're family." And I just was like, "Oh gosh, Matt, thank you."
That's awesome.
Thanks, brother. But that sense of like, so when it comes to like really entering in a person's vocation, I think that there's that element of I was thinking about, sorry, I'm going off in tangents.
No, it's good. Yeah.
But that sense of like, as a spouse, as a parent, or as a priest who has this, I live where they all are. Like it is a virtual fishbowl. Like, I don't know how many times, so I live in the house, like a little apartment space in the house that's our Newman Center.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. It's
attached to where they all hang
it's
out.
Like you walk in the front door and 4 steps up that's where I live. And there is like a gap between the bottom of the door and the floor. It's a good inch, 2 inches.
Okay.
So anything I'm doing up there, they can hear. I remember one of the students was like, one morning he's like, Father, heard you like rocking out to Taylor Swift last night. I was like, well, it wasn't, it was a cover of Taylor Swift, but they can
the
hear
Ryan
everything.
Adams cover? Or?
It was Walk Off the Earth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It was awesome. But that sense of like, as a parent, as a spouse, as a priest living right there, your weaknesses are completely exposed. You can't be faking anything. It's just like, okay, yeah, it's true. This is a really good examination of conscience that I was a little bit short with you. I avoided answering the door when you were knocking, or whatever the thing is. It's just like, Lord, you're calling me to be a better dad than I am.
That's cool.
And that's
just a constant kind of like, pulling fatherhood out of us, right? At our vocations.
And that's something I'd like completely changed my view of priesthood. Because when I was going through seminary, the people teaching were saying, okay, so you're not being ordained to be a sacramental dispenser. You're not being ordained to be just kind of a cog in the machine. You're not being ordained to be administrator of a parish. You're being ordained to be something else. And they never could tell us what that was. It was like, well, ministry of presence, or just to be available. Like, what is that?
It's just different. Yeah.
It's just different. And then a number of years into being a priest, one of my brother priests, he had a clear sense of the priest as father. And he just was talking about it. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's it. That's the thing that they were either avoiding saying or didn't even know to say, is that priest in his role as a spiritual dad to spiritual kids. And the thing is, I think I shied away from that even personally right away, because I just always imagined myself as like a 28-year-old priest in the confessional talking to a 90-year-old guy. Yes, my son, go on. Like I can't say that. That's so preposterous.
I always love when like the 26-year-old recently ordained priests are like, my children. At the
exactly.
I was like, wait.
I'm like, I don't think this jives. Now, the good thing is, as I grow older, like now on campus, a lot of our students are the age of kids that I'm the age of their dads. And it's such a gift to me. I mean, just emotionally, spiritually, like even in that role as father, to be able to say, okay, this is the depth. So when it comes to preaching, is not just that. That's the idea. When it comes to sacraments, it's not like it's I don't know how many times in the last half a year even that I'll get like a text or a call from one of our students who'll say, I need to talk. On one hand, if that stopped, then it didn't stop there. Like the text wouldn't stop, or the email wouldn't stop, or the voicemail. I need to talk would be like, okay, I need to be present, whatever. But it would be, I need to talk. I just really need a dad right now. Like, oh, yeah. Because it's easier if someone says, I need to talk. Like, oh, they'll talk tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow. Someone says, I need a dad right now. It's like, you need dad right now. And I'm like, oh, Lord, thank you for giving me this gift of being able to be a spiritual father to these people who you died for. So it's awesome.
That is it, though, right? Like in some ways, like that paternity, I'm trying to think of the way to say this, but it's almost like, I don't know. Like I see in my wife, right? Like maternity is just so much a part of who she is and her nature, like even biologically, right? Yeah. Like she's just like wired for it. I feel like I've had to learn it over the years. Like these kids have kind of pulled it out of me. Do you feel that in your priesthood too? Like you've become it over time?
You nailed it. That's it. It was not something, I mean, I didn't know even guys who were like, oh, I just really feel called to be a father. I'm like, I never felt called to be a father.
Yeah, right. That's kind of
like,
what I mean.
I was like, I think she's really adorable and I'd like to marry her. Like that, not, I think I want to have children with that person. And so they've had to, like you said, they had to pull it out of me and like kind of, reveal
shape
something.
Your own heart to like
reveal something in me that
way.
I never would have anticipated, I guess.
That's powerful. Yeah. That's a very powerful image of the priesthood. I think you're right, like in a particular way. I mean, I'm thinking too of college campus. We talked about the countercultural moment, the priesthood, like in a particular way. I'm just interested. I've never seen it in person, right? I'm just like interested of this thought of like Father Mike Schmitz walking around this campus with all these college students. I mean, it's probably a big state school, I'm thinking, right?
Yeah,
For the most part, like
probably 15,000, 16,000.
Big, a lot of people. There's a really like interesting, like what's that like when you encounter people who maybe didn't grow up Catholic or fell away? Like is that, I bet that sharpens you in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, there is, there has been a pretty seismic shift when it comes to college campuses.
That you've noticed?
That I've noticed,
wow.
yeah. Right when I got to campus, this is the beginning of my 15th year on campus, which is just such a gift.
Wow.
And so when I first got there were a number of administrators, faculty, who I guess would have an agenda that would be relatively contrary to the church. But it would be pretty limited to faculty administration. And in recent years, I've seen how it has bled down to the student body.
Wow.
And it's just really remarkable. And not just in some of the hot button issues, although that's obviously a big deal. It's an interesting thing that I've seen where people have adopted, really embraced what I would call, I don't know if this is a real word, but identitarianism, where it's kind of the idea that I'm taking my identity from the group I most find affinity towards. So I'm taking my identity from the LGBT community. That's who I am, and therefore, if they stand for anything, that's where I stand. I take my identity from I'm a Latina, I'm Latino, and so that's the group that you need to see me as that. I am this particular group, and it's like this sense of talk to me as a member of the group rather than talk to me as an individual. Because I see myself as a member of the group, not even necessarily as an individual, which is just, it boggles my mind because it's something I've been trying to wrap my mind around when it comes to, but you are an individual. And so when I'm talking to you, I'm not seeing, yes, that's part of your story, all these things, whatever the deal is. But the thing that I want to get to is, but like, Tim, who are you? As opposed to you're part of this particular group or that group. And that's been it's been a kind of an interesting nut to kind of study and try to crack.
Yeah, almost how do you counter that? How do you help people counter their, it's personhood, right? It's
yeah,
the loss
exactly. Relationship, of course, but at the same time, it's their relationship to the group that is giving them their identity. And so it's kind of one of those, okay, so your relationship with me then is passed to this filter of your relationship with this group and how you perceive yourself now. So I think that, when I've just been trying to be as patient, I guess, with that, like saying like, if someone knows that I respect them, even if what I'm respecting is their self-perception or their identifying with a group rather than, hi, my name's Tim. Yeah, I don't know. If that makes any sense. That was kind of random.
That's interesting. No, I've never heard it put that way before, but that definitely, that's kind of, I mean, you're kind of on the front lines a little bit of some of these different things and encountering them on the campus. I can imagine that's a unique dynamic as kind of culture continues to morph and change.
I mean, that's the thing is because I'd read about it, I'd heard about it in like other contexts, but to encounter individuals who they submit their individuality, they surrender their individuality to the collective. Like, wow, that is fascinating to me.
And you're like, I just want you to meet Christ.
Yes, exactly.
And so how do we do that?
So there's the kind of thing of how will you reach out to my group? I'm like, well, I think just because your group is made up of individuals, so we just reach out to individuals. No. How will you reach out to my group? I'm like, oh, okay. Let me pray about that. Get back to you.
We're talking right now, right?
We're talking right now.
Interesting. Well, cool. Well, Father, I really appreciate you, taking the time. I mean, we reached out to you a while ago and said, would you think about doing this course? I think it was kind of beautiful to see. There was some trepidation on you in terms of, like, can I really give a full, masterclass style quality course on preaching, which was in a lot of ways inspiring for me to see kind of the humility in that response. And I'm grateful that the Lord and Mark Hart worked on your heart a little bit too, because it's I really am convinced that it's going to bless a lot of people in the church, and preaching such a crucial part of it's almost like underrated in some ways. We talked about a little bit in the preparation. It's almost overrated, where some people are like, the mass is the homily, but it's also weirdly like underutilized too sometimes, where we don't really focus on faith comes through hearing. Yeah. This is a crucial part. So, I mean, do you want to give what's kind of the core of your course? You can leave a little sense of what are they going to get a taste of?
Well, I one of the things that keeps coming back to me is the reality that every priest preaches every day. Like get up for daily mass and you say something. And so, let me back up a little bit. One of the things that I find kind of funny, tragic funny, is how some couples who have been married for like 30 years are less patient with each other than couples who've been married for 3 years.
Interesting.
And some people will say, well, of course they are less patient. It's been 30 years. But then I think, well, no, they've had 30 years to know this is the person you married. Like, get used to, why is she always late? Why does he always forget stuff? Like, because that's who you married. Like, after 3 years, be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. After 30, like, oh yeah, of course. Like, just,
at this point, that's how it is.
Exactly. Yeah. But there's that sense of like, but you've had 30 years as well to become, like, when it comes to problem solving, and one of the things when it comes to couples, one of the things I invite them to do is become expert problem solvers with each other.
Cool.
Like, just work on, like, go back over, you had a decision you had to make together and it went really, really well. Why? Like, just stop and analyze, why did that work well? Because 2 days ago you had a decision to make together and it didn't go well. Why? Because 30 years in, you should be awesome at solving problems together because you do it every day. Priests, you preach every single day. After 30 years, you should be amazing at this. But we're not, and one of the reasons we're not is because we're like that, we're like someone who, kind of goes to we have to take a tennis racket, take a tennis ball, and we go up to the wall and just kind of hit back and forth. We just kind of hit it at the wall. And like, yeah, no, I'm playing tennis. I'm just kind of hitting, or you just volley over, there's someone on the other end, they hit the back. You're not playing, you're not practicing with intention. And so when we're preaching, it's like, okay, how can I make this, normal 8 a.m. Tuesday morning homily something that is memorable, something that is oriented towards change, something that is not just kind of what I thought of in the walk between the chair and the pulpit, so that I can practice preaching transformationally. And so that would make sense that if a priest did this on a regular basis in small ways, after 10 years, Sundays should be like, no, I know what I'm doing. Even if it's not every Sunday's a home run, it would be like, oh, I realize now at this point, I should stop talking. Like, land the plane, bro. Kind of like one of those things of you should get really good at this just by practicing with intentionality.
Yeah. And I think your course it's eminently practical. Like, it's not, it's not one of these like this that's just all like theoretical about like the word as whatever. It's like,
I don't know any theory.
This is like this is like tips and things that can be like actually implemented for people to practice intentionally to get better at preaching. I think in a lot of ways too. Like, I give talks sometimes and like I was getting a ton out of it just for like, oh, okay, like that's kind of how you know structure things and come up with things. So I think anyone would benefit from it. Certainly in a particular way. There's a core message there though that's for your brother priests and for deacons and anyone who gives homilies. So Father Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to come out here and do this Revive course and do the podcast, and appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I'm honored. Thanks.
Yeah, God bless you.